Okay, so I was just sitting around getting bored and thought that I would like to just communicate a thought that I have to anybody who happens to end up listening to it. Um, and basically, a lot of the time when people talk about the future or why we should care about how we make provision for future generations, a lot of the time there's kind of this defense that people use where they say, oh, but like, it's not me. Like, I just care about myself and my own happiness and that kind of thing. Um, Now, I'm not really going to get into how I feel that. Well, actually, I am going to get into this. This is exactly what I am getting into. Um, so essentially, I just put together this basic diagram, and I'm not really a diagram maker, so forgive me. But what I want to try and illustrate is that I would like to try and talk about what is you, because it seems to be something that I think a lot of people tend to like oversimplify. There's like this concrete idea that people have in their heads about what they are, and I just want to try and maybe show that it's not really that simple, or at least not as simple as people seem to tend to think. Yeah, so let's say you're a person, like this person over here. Now, sometimes people will say that they are their brains or their body. Yeah, that's typically the answers that I get when somebody says that they only care about their own happiness, and I ask them what they are in that context. Um, so let's say, for instance, that you are just your brain and your body. Now, what happens when you die is that you are obviously going to decay, and that process of decaying is effectively just the release of the energy that exists within your body and your brain. It's just being released into your environment or dissipated into the environment, and your environment will absorb that energy and transfer it onto other things. Like, that energy is not going to just sort of disappear into thin air like your idea of what you are may. Um, there's not really any disappearing into thin air at all. Everything that you were is going to be dissipated into the environment. And let's say, for instance, this is really just like a crude example that I've put together here, trying to illustrate a point. There are many different ways that you could do this or illustrate this. This just happens to be how I'm going to do it right now. So let's say you die next to this tree, okay, and your energy dissipates into the ground. And yeah, let's just say the ground, and let's say that makes its way into the roots of this tree, okay, and that energy, it's carried into this tree. That's cool. Then let's say the tree grows some like fruit with some of your energy as well. Now let's say somebody eats that fruit, somebody else. Now my question kind of becomes like, are you really even dead? Because in my mind, you aren't really ever dead. There's you may not be conscious, but that's just a consequence of not having a functional brain anymore. But are you really willing to reduce who you are, or your idea of you, into a single person that sort of just disappears out of existence as soon as they start decaying into the environment? I don't really think that that's a fair way to think about things. Like, personally, I think that we are ultimately just energy, and everything in the universe is ultimately just energy being expressed in different ways. And the thing about energy is that it doesn't die. It just transfers itself between places and that kind of thing, right? So, I mean, that's like conservation of energy. That is an important part of this. So when you die as a person and your energy, or you, in my opinion, dissipate into your environment, you're still actually gonna find your way into life. I mean, whether it's the tree or like fruit that somebody else eats, and then your energy is even in another living being, and effectively you are still here, right? Your brain isn't here, but I don't think that your brain is you, or at least I don't think that your brain is all that there is to you, or your body for that matter. Like, this is somebody else's body and somebody else's brain, but this is you or at least a part of you in this apple here. And then ultimately you find your way sort of in the same position where this guy is going to die, and the same thing just kind of keeps on happening. It obviously doesn't always happen in the sense that, like, you decay next to a tree and then that tree grows into fruit and somebody else eats the fruit and then your energy's in somebody else. But just for this example, I was just trying to illustrate that. So what I'm ultimately trying to say here is that it's not that sort of simple to say that you shouldn't care about future generations, or the state of this planet and the state of affairs on this planet. It's not fair to say that that's not relevant to you, because ultimately you could end up as one of the future generations. And so we are effectively on this planet handing the present moment when we die over to ourselves, to just kind of live again in a different body. I mean, I'm not trying to say like traditional sort of interpretations of reincarnation, as far as I understand, tend to sort of be like this idea that you, as like yourself, sort of as in like your brain, or your mind, sort of gets transferred into like another entity, like just sort of magically, like through thin air, like almost teleporting into another new thing being born. But I mean, I don't really think that it's like that. I just think that you die, you decay, your energy goes into other living things, and so you effectively live on. And I don't think that it makes sense to hand the world over to yourself in a state that is worse than what you were born into. Yeah, so this is the first crude example. I have another example that I'd like to make. So usually most people are like, at least to some degree, kind of like into food, or at least eating. I'm pretty sure that anybody listening to this video has experienced eating before, and I would just kind of like to put another spin on that entire situation. So ultimately, like, let's say you have 100% energy, okay? And you put that energy out into the universe, okay, or into your environment, by doing different things like walking and talking to people and moving things around. You're basically just transferring your energy into different people and different things, and that kind of thing. Okay, so when your energy like decreases, eventually you get to a point where you become hungry and you need more energy, so you eat food, and that gives you the energy from the food, which again could have just been kind of this whole thing. And so you get this energy into yourself, and then you have more energy again, okay? And then you go around doing whatever it is that you do again, and you just put that energy out into your environment again, and then you just kind of repeat the same thing over and over and over again until you die. And I mean, another thing that I'd like to speak about here is that when this energy is being transmitted into your environment and the things that surround you, is that not also you? Are you not also sort of living on with the energy that came out of you, the way that it ripples out into the future? For instance, if you say something really mean to another human being, that energy that is behind the words that you say, and the energy that is carried through the air in waves into the other person's ear, and which places itself then into their eardrums and effectively like makes its way into their brain, is that not also you? Do you not live on with the chair that you moved earlier today? Like, I honestly think that you do. Like, I don't like the idea of sort of isolating yourself to your body and your brain, because the thing is that just totally doesn't take into account the entire aspect of you eating and getting more energy and putting that energy into your environment. Like, why is the energy that you transmit into the environment not you? Yeah, I don't really get that. I think that it is you. I think that we never actually die. I agree that we lose consciousness, in terms of what we think is consciousness within our brains, when our brains are no longer healthy sort of functional things and have just decayed into nothing. Well, not into nothing, but effectively just been absorbed by the environment, and put into new things. Yeah, so effectively, like, the entire point of what I'm saying here is that it's not really, first of all, simple to sort of like come up with the idea of what you are and where you end and where other people start and where other people end, and how your starting and ending kind of fits into this whole equation. Yeah, I'm just essentially trying to say that it is more complicated than we tend to assume, and that using the defense, even though I don't consider it a valid defense to say that you don't care about anybody else, so you're just going to live for yourself, you, in that case, are actually not considering the fact that you exist in many places other than your body and your brain. For instance, in all of the things that you've put energy into in the past and the present, and the way that that energy sort of alters the future and the present moment, going forward into the future. So really, I just want to start talking about these things and just getting them off my mind, because I'm starting to freak out a little bit about how humanity is kind of just giving up on itself. Like we just accept that there are corrupt governments in the world that don't care about us at all in terms of our health or our well-being, mentally and physically. They just see us as a pot of money that they hope makes them some profit. Most governments are just being run as businesses, but ultimately they have a massive effect on the planet and us as human beings on this planet. And I just don't think that it's right, you know, like, the fact of the matter is that if we as human beings don't get our shit together very quickly, there isn't really just not going to be any hope for fixing things. I believe that right now, as things are, we still kind of do have some sort of potential, like a remedy for the situation, which is effectively just for us to stop distracting ourselves and lying to ourselves, that to convince ourselves that everything will just magically be okay with people like Donald Trump running the world's largest economy, and Saudi Arabia's crown prince. These people are bad people, and when I say bad people, what I really mean is that they are just stupid people, like very, very primitive, basic people who think that things like money are intricate and like amazing, when really, like, money is just, it's just money. It's not, it doesn't have any like depth really. It's just a transfer of value. And I mean, money in itself is a cool thing, right? But because we can exchange it like universally, well, not quite, because we have so many different currencies that are limited by borders in terms of like foreign exchange and that kind of thing. But I mean, the basic idea of money is meant to just be that you can trade value without needing specific items to like barter with and that kind of thing, which is great. Like, money is a great thing. It's a very smart thing. But in comparison to other things, like money is kind of like a retarded thing. In comparison, like things like unity and friendship and love and compassion, like these things are far deeper. I mean, even yourself, like we as human beings, as these living organisms with cooperating like microorganisms within ourselves, which are all working together to express ourselves, those are intelligent things, in my opinion, not really money. Like, man-made things can only really be so complex, I feel, and so can only really be like so intelligent, at least for the moment. Like, I think that ultimately, I think that the fabric of reality and like space-time is probably far more intricate and intelligent than anything that human beings will ever play a role in creating. Just kind of because the underlying material needs to be which is in this case like space-time, needs to be complex enough to house anything that is expressed within this universe. So that's the reason why I kind of consider it to always be above everything else in terms of complexity, or at least like potential complexity. Yeah, so I'm kind of just making this video to vent a bit, because it gets a bit much sometimes to watch how people are just kind of happy to distract themselves. I mean, we have things like memes, for instance, and I mean, I don't really like to like hate on things that people enjoy, but really, like, most memes that I see are just like clear distractions from the things that we don't want to speak about, like the fact that bombs are being dropped on people right now, and those bombs have been paid for by taxpayers. Those bombs don't just magically create themselves. Like, we the people are literally killing ourselves as a society, and we're doing that through the people that we have elected into office. We are ultimately responsible for this, and even if we want to feel that we aren't responsible for electing the president or electing the government or whatever it is, like, ultimately we're responsible for resisting how those governments are destroying our planet for their own material gain. They're effectively destroying the future. And the thing is, it's not even just the governments that are destroying the future, it's us ourselves. As a society, we've sort of become like so obsessed with distractions like TV series and like memes on the internet, for example, and I mean even things like computer games. Like, I mean, I love to play computer games, but ultimately at the end of the day I really do recognize that I'm just trying to distract myself from thinking about the horrors that are occurring in the world right now. And I don't think that that is a good thing. Like, I think that we need to speak more about the reality of our situation. Yeah, so I'm gonna try and start speaking more about this kind of stuff. There's not really, at least in my plans at the moment, like ever a plan to set like really any sort of agenda in terms of what I want to speak about. I kind of just want to speak about whatever's on my mind. But yeah, ultimately we need to figure something out, and we need to figure it out quickly. And thankfully there are emerging technologies such as Ethereum, or decentralized computing in general. And those kind of systems do allow us to create potential like global democracies. And I only say potential in terms of like the adoption of the technologies, in terms of the technology being adequate in itself to host a global democracy. It's pretty much there. I mean, the only current issue would be having like high throughput of votes, but you don't really need high throughput of votes if you consider how long it takes to like sort of tally most voting systems in the world. But I'm not making an argument against high throughput systems, and with, for example, Serenity in Ethereum on the roadmap in the future, coming in the future, we will have much higher like network throughput on a decentralized computing platform. And in those kind of instances, like, we could build a new global government that works, like, no problem really, like, at least no problem in the sense that we could make it better than what we've currently got, because, I mean, it's actually kind of like a benefit in a way. Like, if we had governments in the world right now that were doing a good job, okay, if we could say that we feel that most of the governments in the world right now are doing a good job, and like realistically doing a good job. No, I'm not talking about like watching Fox News or something and then saying that your president is great. I mean, actually looking at what they do and what they say, and I mean, not just the president, but the government in general, like what is actually happening in the country. If we could say that it was being done well, then that would almost be a bit more of a challenge in a way, because the thing is, then it makes it very difficult to actually build a system that does things like super well, because most of the people in the world already feel that things are being done well, so it becomes a bit of a problem in terms of adoption. But thankfully, and I use that word lightly, the governments, at least most of them in the world right now, are absolutely like horrific in terms of the way that the systems are structured and the way that the people of those countries are represented by their governments. It's just horribly done, which is a good thing in the sense that it makes it very easy to convince people that their system could be better. So that helps with adoption of systems that work really well. And there are technologies like Aragon, for instance. Like, Aragon is great. Oh, this is not even actually where I'm meant to go. This is where I'm meant to go. Aragon is effectively a platform that exists right now on the Ethereum mainnet, which is just maybe a fancy way of saying that it's in production, or it's like properly functional. It's not in beta, not in testing, it's actually live. And what you can do with Aragon is you can create a new decentralized autonomous organization, and you can do things like voting, like creating votes, for instance, and then people within your organization can vote on those topics. But the cool thing about these votes is that they are completely decentralized on the Ethereum virtual machine. So if the US government, for instance, wanted to censor your vote, they would have a very, very difficult time doing that. And in the future, it would actually become impossible for them to do that. Even if they, like, I'm implying that they could even get it right now. I don't even know if they could, to be honest with you. It would be an interesting thing to witness. I actually wouldn't mind if they tried it. Because I think that the community would react in a way that just made it impossible for them again. Like, effectively, if they could get enough computing power to have more than 50% of the Ethereum network's computing power, then they could mess with your votes a bit. But I don't think that the US government could necessarily pull something like that off without people responding to it in a way that ends their attempt in its tracks. But regardless, like, in the future, when we have things like proof of stake built into Ethereum, then it's basically going to become impossible for any sort of government to fraudulently put transactions onto the Ethereum blockchain. And yeah, so I mean, I don't really want to get too involved in like decentralized systems right now. I will in the future. But yeah, this video was more just to try and convince anybody that watches this that we are more than our brains and our physical, like, human bodies, through this extension of ourselves into what we put ourselves into, or how we express ourselves into our environment and imprint ourselves into our environment. Those imprints that we make into our environment are effectively us still. So yeah, thanks for listening if you listen to this, I guess. I'll hopefully do this more often, because honestly it does feel like I'm getting a weight off my chest, at least a little bit. And if even one person can listen to this and maybe think to themselves that they'd like to start talking about this kind of stuff with other people a bit more, just to sort of spread like awareness in terms of us looking after the present sort of moment, so that we can harbor a healthy future for ourselves and others, yeah, then I'm happy. So goodbye.